The mystery. The magic. The game. Quest 64, the new adventure RPG for Nintendo 64.
Ooh.
Get in or get out.
Welcome back to Retro Rebound. In today's video, we are getting you just a touch upset. We are talking about the top 10 worst RPGs of all time. And you know what these videos usually are made of? Hot takes and guts. And you got some guts if you're me, sitting down knowing I got some pretty outlandish takes here on this list. However, I encourage you to share your top 10 worst RPG list down below. Certainly, I don't have the law of the land here when it comes to the worst role-playing games ever, so I encourage your disagreement. At the same time, I want to be clear about one thing. It's my personal list, and also we're not going to Metacritic or OpenCritic, filtering the review scores by the objectively worst RPGs of all time. I don't go to play games that are quite literally not finished. I'm talking about games that were colossal disasters or disappointments, likely from franchises or developers that you've also seen me celebrate. So ladies and gentlemen, let's not delay any further. At least this list isn't 30 games long like the first one. So let's start off with a developer that I do love now, but man, it took some time getting there. And that is Spiders, who delivers our number 10 item on the list in Bound by Flame. You know, I got some good memories with this one strictly because it is one of the first video games that I did review. I started reviewing games more seriously in 2014 where I would get review copies. And when I saw Bound by Flame, I was excited. I'm a BioWare diehard, as many of you know. Not as much nowadays, but like old school BioWare. Oh man, did I love them. So here comes Spiders, who always had that vibe and have even publicly said so, that they want the BioWare crown. They want to replace old BioWare because BioWare went on to make more action RPGs and not games like Dragon Age Origins or KOTOR. You know, they went on to a totally different style of RPG. So here comes Spiders trying to fill that void. They introduced Bound by Flame, and even though they make interesting worlds, this was kind of in their Pretender era. The main character is a total doucher in Bound by Flame. Hell, everyone here is, because the world is ending, but I don't care. It feels so one note because the writing is so bad, the dialogue is so bad, the voice acting is so bad, and this combat, God, they bombard you. They bombard you with enemies that are relentless, and it feels like a poor man's Witcher, a poor man's Dragon Age 2. You have a warrior stance and a ranger stance. The warrior gets a two-handed weapon and you can get abilities like countering enemies. Meanwhile, the ranger can dodge just exclusively backwards, and what's annoying is you're always getting knocked back by enemies, and I hate that in games. It's a pet peeve, I know, but like when it's not balanced, oh, it just rubs me the wrong way. In this game, you could get flicked and your character's like, whoa, chill out, dude, just constantly getting knocked back. So ultimately, it is an experience that is really built off loving the idea of something. Like, I love the idea of BioWare games, but the actual execution of making a BioWare style title is not here in Bound by Flame. Now, to be clear, as we show in our top 30 RPGs of all time, then Spiders would get that right with Greedfall. But this game just, I cannot stand it. It wants to be Dragon Age so bad, but it is kind of a budget Walmart, Amazon quality Dragon Age game, and I'm not here for it. What I'm also not here for is this optimization. I mean, everything from the frame rate to the lighting, it looks really bad. Number 9 goes to Quest 64. Oh man, this is a rare one on this list that I didn't finish. Young Maddie couldn't finish it. That's when you know it's a pretty bad sign. You know, you only get a game every now and again, you know? And so when you're a young kid and you drop a game, like for me, Batman Beyond Return of the Joker, you just know that game's got to stink something fierce if like my 3 or 4-year-old brain can comprehend how garbage it is. But then young Maddie in high school picked it back up to try again, and I couldn't get through it again. This is absolutely the most by the numbers RPG we have on this list. And in my opinion, I sometimes prefer an absolutely disastrous video game over a positively content and extremely mundane experience in a game, because it just drives me insane. It's like, you're just totally okay right in the middle of the lane, bro. And Quest 64 has more problems than that, but it starts off that way. I feel like someone has to have already said this, but it really does feel like we have Dragon Quest at home. Well, you collect 4 elements to save the world, so maybe it's just Final Fantasy at home. And speaking of Final Fantasy, much like a couple of games on this list, this is a game in Quest 64 that its proximity to a seminal video game in Final Fantasy VII really hurt it. But the plot is effectively non-existent, so that's failure number one on being a good RPG, is like actually having a story or characters that you can attach yourself to. I think the most impressive thing about this game is that the fields are pretty big, so it is a achievement of what it accomplished on the Nintendo 64. But as you navigate this world, I mean, you'll notice the camera clips and the environments everywhere, and you'll likely get lost very easily. But I think the worst component of Quest 64 is its combat. Its combat is extremely repetitive because you'll earn spells by collecting more of said element. Now, some elements are much better than others, to the point where the balancing is just awful, because when you start getting smoked by enemies, the natural thing is, okay, it's an old game, I'll go grind. But the only way you can get stats up is like if you're running around the world, you get your agility up, but it takes forever to get these stats up. Or if you get hit, then your defense will go up. And if it's happening naturally, I guess that's okay. But Quest 64 is a game where like it takes forever to get these stats up. So if you get hit like a million times, you're just spending battles just healing, getting hit, healing, getting hit. And so removing that traditional leveling up to be different hurt the game horribly. So you like double, triple, quadruple sometimes the amount of time you're spending grinding in this game because of its arbitrary leveling system. So yeah, Quest 64 is just awful, man. Okay, this next one, it stings, and I'm not an idiot. Number 8 is Final Fantasy VIII. I'll read the comments and see what y'all got about this one. But for me, look, I know that many people leap to the defense of Final Fantasy VIII. As a controversial Final Fantasy defender myself, Final Fantasy VIII fans, I am your friend, not your enemy. I adore things like the cutscenes in Final Fantasy VIII and how they mix pre-rendered scenes with gameplay to give it a more cinematic feel, such as the Battle of the Garden. It's a thing of beauty, and I think what crushes me most about this game is ever since I beat it for this channel, I've thought about it so much, how the first half of Final Fantasy VIII was great. Arguably some of my favorite Final Fantasy in certain stretches. The plot setup, the balancing, the distinct combat elements, it all comes together where I'm like, yeah, this is Final Fantasy, man. Like, they're doing everything different just because they can. They're coming off of the amazing Final Fantasy VII. Like, what could go wrong here? But it really feels like the second half of the game. Everything from the narrative execution to the gameplay balancing collapses upon itself, and Square just threw the towel. I know that's not what anyone wants to hear, but that is certainly how I felt when all of a sudden you're getting shot into outer space. Renoa's got a conflicted love life. The story is inferring that everyone's from the same orphanage. The unfulfilling mystery of Laguna, the extremely thin character development of the entire game's cast, just all of this takes over. And I feel like anytime I read about why someone should like this game, which including my own Final Fantasy VIII retrospective, the comments are loaded with like, "You don't get it, bro," type energy. It's personally stunning to me as someone who accepts pretty mid Final Fantasy games like 13 as some of their just guilty pleasures, that people can just look at this extremely flawed game and be like, "You just don't get it, bro." Like, as someone who defends 13, I get it. When people are like, "This game sucks," I'm like, I get it. It does kind of suck. It just speaks to my very particular sensibilities. But this story is so batshit insane that by the end of the game, I felt so disconnected from the plot that continuously made grand leap after grand leap where I was tuned out by the time the credits rolled. It's a game that makes combat and engaging with it an uphill battle, and when you decide to play it, it gets tougher, and there isn't any thematic purpose in any of that. It's just bad game design. The magic system where you have junctions is really confusing in its introduction, especially when you're constantly redoing your builds for every time you jump around the timeline between Squall and Laguna. And I don't think the system ever justifies just replacing equipment. It's like, okay, fire is going to increase your strength, or fire can increase your fire defense strength if you equip it over here, but then it gets more and more convoluted where I'm just like, give me a bracelet that gives me fire defense and just call it a day. But since the whole kind of economy of the combat is built around magic, you'll like grind to stock some magic only to realize you're making the game more difficult for yourself. So there's like a way to play Final Fantasy VIII as well, which also bums me out with RPGs. It's like, it should be about always how you want to play the game. So I don't think Final Fantasy VIII is really a player-first experience anywhere. And for that, it is one of my least favorite RPGs I've played. Hey, I kept that out of my whole retrospective. So you know what? At least you can say I'm fair when I'm assessing these games, and I give them time to really marinate before I put a stamp like that on it. However, I wasn't really patient with this one. Number 7 goes to Reynaudis. I reviewed this last year. I don't like this game at all. At all. I get that Furyu's whole brand of video games as a whole is basically budget versions of things that you know you already love. Like, hey, you love Persona? Here's the Caligula effect. Hey, you love Kingdom Hearts? I guess here's Reynatus. And look, everything from the camera to the shoddy visuals, this game just pisses me off. I mean, look, especially the visuals. I can tolerate a lot. I can tolerate jank, I can tolerate awful animations, I can even sometimes tolerate awful visuals if the trade-off is visible somewhere. But every step of the way, Reynatus is extremely compromised. It's got an incoherent plot. It's got a really busted, weird magic system where it actually takes you out of the combat system. Why is anything the way it is in Reynatus is beyond me. My only guess, as I said in my review of it, is that the game was just never tested. They just made it on a piece of paper, put it all in the engine and went, hope it works. It's coming out as soon as it's done. And they released it. And some people gobbled it up. For me, I vomited it out. I literally wanted to give this game a chance because I do like old Furyu JRPGs, like the Caligula effect I mentioned earlier. Pretty solid JRPG, all things considered. Not going to be your favorite game ever, but this company, Furyu, fits right in that pocket with old Spiders, where Spiders was making Bound by Flame, and I give Technomancer a little bit of a pass because its universe is kind of unique, but it's just so flawed. They're trying to be someone else that they currently can't be, and that's where Furyu still is. They're trying so hard to be someone like Atlas, but they just can't be quite yet, and Reynatus was marketed and presented as this next big step forward, but when I played it, my mind was blown at just how bad it was. Okay, so I don't know if everyone agrees with this 6 option here, because when I talked about this with my game development team, a lot of them were stunned that I felt this way. But number 6 goes to our favorite franchise, Pokemon. Pokemon Sword and Shield is absolutely my least favorite mainline Pokemon game by a mile. This is the first Switch exclusive Pokemon game, and the expectations were high. We saw what Breath of the Wild did, and here comes Pokemon onto the Switch. Finally, this is the moment we've been waiting for. The grand overhaul of Pokemon, and all of a sudden you see horrible pop-in. It felt like I was super justified in my feelings, by the way, when Legends Arceus came out, but when you look around at literally any other Nintendo franchise, Metroid Prime 4, Zelda, Tears of the Kingdom, or Breath of the Wild, you see where they started and how they glowed up. And then you look at Pokemon, particularly in this case, one of the first console-based Pokemon games, right? And this is what we get. You get Dynamax, which just makes Pokemon bigger. I mean, what happened to Mega Evolutions? This just sucks in my opinion. It's the same battle system, which again, when Legends Arceus switched it up, a lot of people were like, yeah, wow, this is great. I'm like, this is what I've been talking about all along. Like, Sword and Shield felt so stuck in the past in every single way, and it has my least favorite music track in a video game ever. Listen to Holberry in Pokemon Sword and Shield. Go ahead. Try to tell me this is not that bad. Go ahead. I would love to see someone go down below and explain to me how that track is not an absolute assault on your eardrums. Look, I absolutely do love Pokemon. I know that Nintendo is constantly working us by giving us these underfunded games knowing we're going to buy them up, and I am guilty as charged. Will I be there for Pokemon Legends ZA? Absolutely. But for a mainline title to be making a huge technological leap from the 3DS to the Switch, to see what we got out of it, the lack of innovation across the board, the boring world, the boring story, the boring combat, the new gimmick isn't really a new gimmick at all. Team Yell is awful. There is just so much about this game that fell so beyond flat. It felt like I was totally justified for abandoning this series when I was younger to go play Battle Network. Number 5. I promised myself I would never talk about this game again, but when I was making this list, I kind of had to do it because Dragon Age the Veilguard, man, an RPG, it lives and dies on its writing. And Dragon Age the Veilguard, I think, does, out of any game on this list, have some of the worst writing that I personally have experienced. Outside of, funny enough, one other BioWare game on this list. But Dragon Age the Veilguard managed to do one thing that I never expected. I've covered BioWare my entire life. And when I saw Anthem come and go, I was like, that is the biggest failure in BioWare's history. you find out it's got 5 million sales. I didn't really care at the time, but then I play Mass Effect Andromeda. Man, this also isn't good. What a spectacular failure by BioWare. Look at the my face is tired moment. What a miss from this company that I grew up adoring. Veilguard, for me, was so, I would call it, transformatively bad that it made me revisit those games and go, you know what? Andromeda's kind of like C tier now. Anthem, like, there's some days I'm like, I think I liked Anthem more than Veilguard because, again, BioWare games, to see how far the writing has fallen, their gameplay has never been, as a KOTOR diehard, has never been what you're there for. Mass Effect gameplay does get great, especially in Andromeda, but that is not why we've ever been there for BioWare games. It has always been their stories, their worlds, and their characters. And when they are nauseating to be around because they are so underdeveloped, waste so much time, and talk to you like a 5-year-old, it never allows you to take the game seriously. And the combat gets insanely repetitive. I was a big defender of the combat when I went to my preview. But when I played this game for 70 hours, I was like, Jesus Christ, I can't do this anymore. This game almost made me lose my mind when I was playing it. Like, the amount of one-liners in this game that made my jaw hit the floor, poor line delivery, lack of choice and consequence. Like, I know we had so many moments where we felt like it was a real backbreaker for BioWare. We went through Andromeda, we went through Anthem, but for me, Veilguard was that moment where I was like, they had everything from a long development timeline to all the resources, the backing of an EA supporting single-player games, a single-player BioWare game, and this is what they put out. This game was so deeply upsetting for me, man. I wanted it to be good so bad. Number 4, let's have some fun here. Pretty much any Ubisoft game after Far Cry 3. What? What is this entry, Maddie? Points for creativity for me here, but hear me out. I do like a good old Ubisoft open world game. However, one thing that I noticed in the early 2010s is as Ubisoft would branch out and add like a skill tree to their game, they'd start calling it a role-playing game. They'd put the role-playing game tag on storefronts like, hey, you know, Assassin's Creed is also an RPG because you change your equipment and you put stats on there. And then from there, I saw how so many developers started calling their games RPGs. And I think Ubisoft is very much largely responsible for the watering down of what an RPG is. If your game has a skill system of any kind, oh, you get passive upgrades that boost your attack, you're an RPG. Put that stamp on the storefront and get some sucker like me who adores RPGs. Again, I don't hate Ubisoft games, but I can't act like I don't hate what they did to my favorite genre, which is water it down a lot. Where when people see a skill tree, they oogle now and go, oh, it's got role-playing and progression. When it's like, this isn't even the bare minimum of an RPG, but it just radically changed the definition of what one would be forever. Okay, let's get back to actual games now. Number 3, Legacy of Goku 1 on the Game Boy Advance. Oh God, as a kid, another one that I remember, I don't know how I ended up in Legacy of Goku 2 and Boo's Fury because I hated this game. And going back to it for Retro Rebound, I hated the game again. The combat's broken. You're always running out of ki and you're waiting for it to recharge. So you spend more time just standing around and waiting than anything else. The enemies have so much more health than you. Like, you're Goku fighting a wolf and getting bodied endlessly. So what do? You cheese the game because the combat's so full of whiffs that you'll be in front of enemies throwing punches like this and just catching nothing but air. So what do then? You save scum. You save before every single encounter. So when you die, you don't lose a ton of progress. The game is full of lazy, corner-cutting pixel art, particularly in the character portraits and dialogue and some of the environments. And also, there's just very little of what makes the Legacy of Goku series great here. No signs of this were found in this game that somehow Legacy of Goku 2 managed to extract and make into an amazing video games, but I digress. Very little interaction, very little story, and the game feels super aimless. It's just like, what if we made a Game Boy Advance game with Dragon Ball? Okay, let's figure all that out, and we'll make it good later. And they just forgot to make it good. Number 2 goes to Two Worlds. How fitting is that? Okay, so the Oblivion killer itself. Yes, much like I mentioned with something such as like a Quest 64, the hype back then is a big part of the status this game has earned today. And what's funny is as I was researching all of these games again. I was watching like modern day reviews for all of these games, and I got a kick out of so many people going like, it's actually not that bad. But much like what I said about Final Fantasy VIII, it feels like we just have to consciously ignore like 18 different awful things about it to have a somewhat decent time in this game. You have to ignore the absolutely broken enemy AI. And guess what? The constant, whoa, knockback that we were talking about with Bound by Flame, except it's worse here. You are backstepping and getting knocked back endlessly. You have to ignore abysmal voice acting. You have to ignore abysmal animations in a third-person game. You have to ignore abysmal character models in a game that people at the time were calling beautiful. But even when you look at it paired up to Oblivion, which, by the way, everyone makes fun of Bethesda for their technical capabilities, especially at that time, and you're telling me that this is the game that was, it's okay that what it was compared to was not close to it at all? Make that make sense to me. The world design is terrible, limiting your freedom. Enemies are constantly over-leveled. You're constantly trying to cheese them. That is the sign of bad combat. When I have to run away, hide, engage, disengage over and over and over again, that is the sign of a really bad RPG system. Something went wrong, and the combat is what's gone wrong here. It just feels awful to play, man. And it's got some of the worst cutscenes, even for its time. Look, yeah, I know the whole, oh, it's not going to be as great as Oblivion, man. Come on, be fair. It's not even. Take Oblivion out of the picture and look at its own as a 360 era game. Come on. We were capable of so much more. But you know what game had more potential than Two Worlds? Number one on our list. The worst RPG I've ever played. It has not left me ever since I played it a few years ago. And that is Sonic Chronicle, The Dark Brotherhood. BioWare. Why? Oh my God. Why? QTE touch-based combat kills this game. So they have these things called POW moves, right? These POW moves involve you dragging your stylus all over the screen, poking the screen at the right time to do maximum damage, but most time it's not going to process it. You have to touch it at like very distinct times. So you're going to do like none or minimal damage while fighting these enemies. You're going to have slow animations that are going to put Trails of Cold Steel on PS Vita. Yes, that version of Trails of Cold Steel is beat out by Sonic Chronicle, The Dark Brotherhood. You know, this was when I was a blooming Sonic fan too. I was just stepping into the fandom, seeing what everything was about here. I was learning to appreciate, and I stepped into this heaping pile of crap, and I was like, what? This is like the dream game for me. Like, BioWare makes a Sonic game? Are you kidding me? They even made escaping a battle in this game a mini game. Now imagine that across hundreds of random encounters in a turn-based RPG. It sounds awful, doesn't it? And you'll need chows that you equip that'll give you like elemental bonuses to actually do damage to these enemies, or you'll be fighting them forever. But guess what? You can't switch these chows in combat. So if you end up not having just a lucky random assortment of chows equipped at the random time where you're going to get a random encounter, guess what? Doesn't matter. You're going to hit for piss damage. You're going to try to run away. And when you try to run away, it's going to be a mini game. It's a joke. It's a joke. And you use the stylus to run around. It feels awful. The music in this game, I'm sorry, Pokemon Sword and Shield actually may have been beat out here. Take a listen, for the love of God. Just your ears will tell you the whole story here. But I think worse yet, worse than that, is this story. Immature, awful dialogue. Oh, it's a kid's game, Maddie. Give me a break. I have seen kids' games with far more intelligence than what this game has to offer. How about its ending? I'm going to spoil it, so you ready? I'll give you a warning. 3, 2, 1. Okay. Tails, can you believe that ending, he says. Sonic, we'll have to wait for the next episode. The two characters then begin reading the credits of the game, and they end it on a cliffhanger. That is the most awful thing I have seen in my entire life. Also, mechanically, the dialogue is awful. When you ask a question, guess what? If you saw a question you also want to ask to maybe learn more about the story or the characters, it doesn't matter. The question shoves you down the narrative route. So it's basically like a quota. Like, you get to only ask one question, friend. What RPG does that? And this is during the era of BioWare where they were like golden. They were doing everything from Mass Effect to Jade Empire to KOTOR, and they produced this thing. I think the best thing that this game does is let Eggman become a party member, yet the Sonic team is dumb enough to believe that this guy is genuine. I just can't bite onto anything this game has going on for it. So it is absolutely, from top to bottom, the worst RPG I've ever played. And ladies and gentlemen, those are my 10 personal worst RPGs of all time. I leave it in your hands. What do you like? What do you dislike in the role-playing game category? You fire away down below, and I'll catch all of you in the next Retro Rebound. Peace